Welcome to today's webinar. We'll be discussing Chapter 5 of The Last Commons. The chapter is entitled The Institutional Antibody, and the initial discussion will feature our guest, Stephen Murgatroyd, and the additional panelists, Dawn Ringrose, Jeff Uhlich, Haley Simons, who I'll be introducing shortly. But before I do, I'm going to ask ACROS, the KEI Network's AI agent, if it'll give us an update of where we are to this point. We've reviewed 4 chapters so far, and ACROS, will you give us a bit of an overview of Chapter 5?
Certainly. So far, we've explored how institutions can resist change and innovation. Chapter 5, The Institutional Antibody, dives into how these protective mechanisms, meant to preserve stability, often end up stifling necessary progress. It showcases real-world examples of how institutions neutralize both threats and innovative ideas, leading to stagnation. This sets the stage for understanding the challenges and potential solutions for institutional evolution.
Thank you, ACROS. You had an interesting transition in your voice there. Regardless, I will now proceed and introduce our panelists. So welcome. Welcome, Stephen. Welcome, Jeff and Haley and Dawn. So, Stephen, your background's extraordinary, and I could spend more time than we have available to introduce you. But I'm going to, in the short form, say one, you've been trained as a psychologist. I think in England, if I'm not mistaken. You're an author of dozens of books. You've got one coming out shortly. You've got one that you're quite excited about, and I think the market is as well. Your passion of late has been what's going on in K-12, and you certainly know much to share with us today about institutional resistance to change. So that's the topic. I'm delighted you've joined us. Dawn Ringrose, as many of you now know, his forte is organizational excellence through management. Haley Simons, with a diverse interests that range from one of the founders of the Creativity Alberta. I think you're either on the board or strongly involved with creativity in the USA, but you've got your PhD in music. And you've also spent several years now in the world of law. So talk about diversity. That makes you, I think the word is intelligent. I use the word wise with Stephen. I use the word intelligent with you. I use the word fun with Jeff, and I use the word good looking with Dawn. But other than that, Jeff's sort of the last person to introduce. And Jeff's background is extraordinary. One, he's co-editing with me the book, The Last Commons, and in fact, he's the inspiration for the book. He's the one that got me off my fanny and said, there's something here to do yet. And I thought I was going to go through another retirement. So thanks, Jeff. But Jeff's background is human resource management. He's been an international consultant in the Middle East, and you'd have much to share with us about what's really happening in the Middle East. But with that as our background and of the panelists, I welcome all of the guests that are here from across Canada, Ottawa, Vancouver Island, Calgary, Edmonton. But Stephen, I'm going to throw the first question at you. But before I give you a formal question, this topic of institutional resistance is fundamental in the book, and it's been fundamental in what you've been doing, both at the personal level as a psychologist and for someone who's wise about the ways of society. So why is this topic of particular interest to you? Why are you joining us today?
Well, for about 25 years, I ran a large consulting company in Europe. We worked around the world, but we were in the organizational change and transformation business. And we worked for Citibank, Barclays, Heinz, all sorts of large corporations, plus non-profits like Oxfam. And our job was to turn them around or get them into a new place. And so and using that kind of context, I applied a lot of the work I did as a family therapist, because it's all basically the same. You've got disturbed people trying to run organizations which don't want to change, and we call those families. And it's very, very similar kind of work. It just pays a lot better. I had 150 management consultants, so we worked some very substantial clients. One of the biggest was Tesco, and we did a huge transformation at Tesco, got them into the small store business, got them out of some other lines of business. But that was really tough. And so I've been kind of looking at what's going on with leaders around big corporations. And then I got interested in universities and colleges, and I still do a lot of work there. My new book is about, which involved interviewing 30 leaders of higher education across the world and asking them why weren't they leading? Why weren't they involved in change? Why were they kind of hanging on to an institution that was permanently failing? What was going on in their minds? And the answer was, well, we're all thinking of quitting. So, I mean, the average lifespan of a university president now is 2.5 years. So, we have a real problem around the whole question of leading change, managing transformation, and being an effective, courageous leader in a time of great volatility and uncertainty.
Well, that really sets up perfectly the first question, but thank you for that as a personal background.
Yeah.
So if institutions, which you've been working with for a lifetime, are designed to preserve stability, at what point does that strength, stability, become a liability? Why is it that moment so difficult for leaders to recognize in real time? This question gets at the core paradox raised in both the chapter and the recent newsletter, that continuity is often misread as effectiveness, even as success, even as relevance erodes. So why? What have you? I mean, I know you treat, but what's behind this?
Well, if you think about how we reward leaders, let's take a university president. How do we reward them? We reward them by not getting into trouble. We reward them by maintaining the direction of travel they inherited. We reward them on KPIs which are no longer fit for purpose. And so the instinct of a university president is to do what they can to nudge the organization forward. But they're restrained by all of the kind of innovation theater that goes on. Oh, we need to consult, we need to engage, we need bullshit. Do your job. Show some leadership. Show some courage. Get on and challenge and change. And when they do, when the leaders who do that, when they stand up to be counted, they get fired.
Yeah.
And so what we know from looking around the world is courage doesn't pay. We'd rather have permanently failing organizations than really powerful and successful ones. There are exceptions. So if you look at Technology University of Monterey, Arizona State University, or a really big innovation in the 1960s, late 1960s in the UK, the Open University or Athabasca University here, when they started, they were pioneering and breakthrough. But now, both of those, Athabasca and the OU, just look like all the others, stuck.
So the status quo becomes the primary objective of the leader, to maintain whatever worked in the past, but is not
Well, but
necessarily.
they're trying to do things like, let's deploy AI to do the wrong things better and smarter.
Or to
So, so we now have, lots of deployments of AI to do exactly the wrong thing. Which is a theme of my new book coming out in May. Not that I'm here to promote it, May 6th. But I think, I think if you look at the way in which this whole debate about students cheating, which has been going on since the Ming Dynasty, it's about time we realize that what's going on is we don't want to change the business model of how we operate at scale. And it's failing and it's not working, and students are outsmarting the universities every day. But the universities are pretending that they are in control, and they're not. So it's kind of pantomime. It's pantomime season.
The paradox is, you're talking about an institution of learning, an institution of knowledge. They should be first and foremost of being able to adapt to change, and yet in some respects they're champions of not changing. In any case, I want to move on to Dawn. Dawn, I'm going to talk about the mechanics of resistance. The chapter argued that institutions don't reject change outright. They simply delay, and Stephen alluded to it, through processes, committees, consultation, reasonable decisions. In your experience, and I know you've had an array of experience as well, when does delay become actually a decision, and who's actually accountable for that outcome? This invites the panel to confront the subtlety of what we call in the book the antibody mechanism. There's no single actor is at fault, yet the system consistently resists adaptation. So share with us your wisdom.
Well, when I look at the system, I mean, I like the system to be running efficiently, effectively, at a desired level of quality, and and making sure that you've got consistency. Now, that's a lot easier to say than it is to deliver. And organizations are at different levels of maturity with respect to that. But I see that there's a lot of things that get in the way of running it, this way. And so when I think of the many layers of management sometimes that we're adding as organizations get larger, um, the risk avoidance that people get into opposed to creating value, and that you had mentioned earlier about being, the reward and recognition. Well, was one of the lowest rated items on this global index that I've got on the current state of excellence, is tying leadership rewards to the organization's performance. It's very low rated. So what is guiding these people? What are they working towards? You might not get the kind of behavior you're looking for if you're not paying attention to that sort of thing. And I think also you're not seeing in organizations, I think, the ownership over the work that's being done, and alignment of decision rights and timely action on improvement opportunities. And instead, I think what we're getting is more red tape, more convoluted ways of working. And I have to add that there's a big difference between business and government and nonprofits in this respect too. And their maturity in terms of what we should be striving for. And I think that really there needs to be a great untangling. Leaders really have to step back and take a look at the way their organizations are working or not working. And it kind of reminds me of a Robert Bateman quote. Years ago, I was at his gallery, and he was speaking about social media. And he said that it's a sea of irrelevance, and one has to be careful not to drown in it. But it's like organizations these days, with so much information that's not necessarily well organized, and things aren't necessarily working well, efficiently, and you just become totally bogged down. And so you really have to zero in on what's relevant or not.
Well, and it's exceptionally hard when change is coming at you from all angles and you can't find reality, which leads me to the question I have for Dawn, or for Haley, which is the rhetoric, the language versus reality. Why do institutions consistently speak the language of transformation? We're change agents, we're going to make a difference, we're going to lead the world, while continuing to reward continuity? What would have to change internally for that gap to close? I think about boards at universities, for example, which, we'll get to that in a minute. This question targets a structural misalignment between what institutions claim to value and what they actually incentivize, a central theme in both the newsletter and the chapter. Hey, so your turn, Haley.
The old rhetoric versus reality question. Remember back in the day, once upon a time, when rhetoric wasn't the word it is now, and it's actually this perfect microcosm of the rhetoric reality gap. Even the word itself, it used to be one of the highest civic arts, and it was essential to democratic participation. And then it got professionalized and institutionalized, and now it means almost the opposite. And then you have the word institution. While we're at the etymology phase, and the root statuary, to cause or to stand, to set upright, to cause something to stand literally. And then you have all of the related words like constitution and standing together, and then prostitution. So it's the family of words. They essentially are all about fixing things in place against this natural tendency for things to change. And also, once upon a time, for most of human history, I had this conversation with a friend who's an anthropologist. Across most cultures, power used to be situational. So when you look at this history of the great tanglement, as Dawn's talking about, you led when the moment required. When it didn't, you stepped back, and authority had to be continuously renewed. And it wasn't a primitive structure. There were sophisticated examples everywhere. You couldn't just inherit authority. You had to keep earning it until, our legal friends will know, until King Hammurabi around 1750 BC, who had this really inspired idea to write a code. And it became eventually known as, maybe not the oldest, but certainly the longest and best preserved legal text. And it opens with the declaration that the gods themselves had personally selected him to bring this justice to humanity, him specifically. But he didn't invent that divine mandate. But the idea that power could be permanent was something that was there. He just happened to write it down, or he carved it into that volcanic 8-foot piece of rock, and said, no, it's not me. It's the gods. It's all the gods. And he wrapped it a little bit in altruism, and he said, it's not for my benefit. It's not for us. It's for you. I'm doing this for you. And that's what the gods told me to. But what was actually being invented was this idea of structural permanence. And it was divinely ordained. And most importantly, it became not yours to question anymore. And then the idea passed through in Greece and Roman and the church and European feudalism, and you get the Enlightenment, and then God is replaced by reason, but the architecture stays the same. And the architecture is that structure is natural and structure is inevitable, and it's not ours to question, unless you have the credentials from the institution themselves. And that's the DNA we're talking about, that Perry, you're describing in all of these institutions. And it was written in, it was carved in stone. And then you jump to these the forests of New France when the Jesuits came, and they were exceptionally good at keeping records, very, very meticulous records. And the records show, the Huron and the Algonquin and the Innu, that they're not just being asked to change their religion, they're being asked to change their entire relationship with time and with authority and with nature and with each other. And they're pushing back, and they're going, well, why would any rational person consent to a system so clearly designed to serve the people who built it? And they kept pushing back. And I'm going to come back to that in a second. I promise I'll answer the question, Perry. But they can see from the outside what we can't see from the inside, because we're in this system. And their conversion wasn't just theological, it was structural. And they replaced their very natural cyclical framework, where change is natural and leadership is temporary. And it became this hierarchical, permanent, priest-mediated one. And then magically, they made us need the institution. We needed it for access to meaning or salvation or legitimacy and knowledge. And then they make us wonder, we can't imagine life without it. And that's everything. That's all of the institutions. That's healthcare. That's universities. It's law. It's credentialing. Every credentialing body that exists primarily to control access rather than develop capability. So when you ask why institutions speak the language of transformation while rewarding continuity, it's because somewhere it's in the institutional DNA. And there is this unspoken recognition that transformation is inevitable, and the rhetoric then becomes the defense. And it's like the controlled burn designed to prevent the wildfire. And if you perform this loudly enough, this bullshit pantomime that Steve's talking about, then perhaps you can actually avoid experiencing it. So I might ask a slightly different question, not what would have to change internally, but why? How could we possibly expect institutions to change themselves in the first place? It doesn't make sense. And I don't know if anybody can name just a single institution that's voluntarily dismantled its own reward structure before a crisis forced it to. And you pop it in the comments. I couldn't find one. Find one. So
One flew over the cuckoo's nest was a good example of where institutional change was coming from within, but it came from the consumer. And it would seem to me, Haley, that the very nature of institutions, which is where we place our trust during the age of faith in the church, or the age of knowledge with the universities, the colleges, the institutions, the credentialing, the public is guilty too, because they've placed that trust. And for those that are speaking up and out, they become the outliers. So Jeff, I'm going to transition and wrap this up with you, because there's a cost to this. It's all well and good to say, well, institutions become rigidified and self-serving, but at some point there's a cost. The chapter suggests that the real cost of this institutional antibody to change is not failure, but missed opportunity. If they're preserving the past, what are they missing in going forward? Can you point to examples where preservation of the system quietly destroyed its future, besides Kodak? That's the one we routinely think of, but this pushes the discussion beyond theory into lived experience, exactly where the KEI audience tends to engage most effectively, and what today we think is the challenge to institutions this very day, given AI, given socio-demographic change, given the forces of change that exist today. Institutions widely are vulnerable. So let's hear from you.
Okay. So I was going to mention Kodak. It's one example that you reference in your book, Perry, and it's a well-known one. Kodak invented the digital camera, but most of their revenue came from sales of film. And so it was actually a rational decision on their part to try and preserve that revenue stream and the investment that they had made over decades into that business. And so they were able to obfuscate and delay and deny the onslaught of digital cameras to the point where they became irrelevant. Another example that I've cited here in these sessions before is Intel and Andy Grove, who very consciously, I think this might be a good example of what Haley was looking for when Andy Grove, and I think it was Gordon Moore at the time who led that company, decided very consciously to disrupt their business and take it in a new direction. And they became the leader in that field, only then to have their successors fall prey to the same institutional antibody that we're talking about, that they became victims of that success, and they didn't demonstrate the leadership that Andy and Gordon did. And Intel has become the laggard. Another one that came to mind was Blockbuster. Blockbuster was a famously successful company, but their revenue stream, most of their profit came from late fees, if you can imagine. So they served their customers, they provided a valuable service, and they were killing it on late fees. And they were looking at the emergence of streaming video, and it was slow and laggy and didn't scale, and they weren't feeling threatened by it, but it was quietly building in the background and coming to eat their lunch. And eventually you saw what happened with Reed Hastings. He built Netflix at first by shipping physical DVDs in the mail, and nobody took that seriously. They didn't think that was a threat. And then, but they were building, the name implied, Netflix, a streaming business was coming. And now Netflix is the behemoth in the industry with about 300 million subscribers. And they're driving the content war. So what this all made me think of was, reminded me of Clayton Christensen and the Innovator's Dilemma. And Stephen referred to Athabasca University, that was, when it emerged, a leader in the field of online education. We had something really special here in Alberta that the leader has become a laggard, as I think you were implying, Stephen.
Well, yeah.
Right. And the reason, as a number of people have mentioned, is upsetting the apple cart is not rewarded in our systems and in our structures, right? If you are actively out there proposing something that will just be seen to be destroying your major revenue stream, your board isn't going to like it. Your customers may think it's a distraction, and it may affect your bottom line. But the incentives, the KPIs that people have mentioned, all of the reward mechanisms that we have are still focused on preserving that revenue stream which got you there. And what got you there won't get you there in the future. And that's the problem that organizations face. So in some respects, I think it's a very rational choice. And then there's all the performative stuff that goes around all of the transformation talk and theater that organizations fall into. And in some ways, organizations can't help themselves but to be disrupted by the young upstart that doesn't have the overhead and the baggage that they carry with them. And that's another factor. They can't in some respects compete with some of those lighter, leaner, more agile competitors that are up and coming. And that's to the point about AI. Of course, there's theater now as to how that's being deployed and where. But there are companies, like if Perry and I were on a board of a company that was acquired by the company Chegg. And about 3 years ago, Chegg was trading at over $100 US per share. And on November of 2022, ChatGPT came out. And what Chegg was doing was helping students prepare, some would say cheat for exams, by providing answer guides for exams at university and college level. And Chegg is now trading for under $1 a share. They did not see that coming. Maybe they had some awareness. They were a big and sophisticated company. Perry and I were on the board of this other company that was acquired by Chegg just before ChatGPT was launched.
Right.
We were with the founder the other day, and he was remarking on the good fortune of his timing to sell the company at that time.
Right. The good fortune. Yeah. And
so that was an example of an upstart technology arriving and just completely pulling the rug out from under what was a very successful business. I used to have shares in Chegg, and I thought it had a lot of potential, and it's a penny stock now. So how I don't know how maybe they couldn't have anticipated that. Maybe they should have, but it's hard because everything that they were doing was helping them to understand that they were successful in their market with their product. And then along came ChatGPT, and night and day.
So it's easy to target institutions. We've got the Kodak example. We've certainly got many examples in the educational system, typically publicly financed, by the way, where security is because the money flows as if it grows on trees. So the accountability of shrinking dollars would only come as a byproduct of a government, which then is confronted by unions and protesting students to not change, not take anything away from this famous institution. You can see all the antibodies that surround that institution is the resistance to change. So what can you do? And I'm gonna open the discussion now to the audience itself. I'll ask Stephen though for a comment here, because at the individuals are just as vulnerable as corporations and institutions to deny what is evident in front of them, that change is underway. It could be in a marital relationship where change is happening and it's right before you and you don't see it. Both parties. It can be in a small corporation. It can be in a large corporation. Resistance to change, when learning is fundamental to life and making adaptations to change, and human beings deny it, And you see this in your clinical practice, Stephen, and you also would see it at the organizational level. Human beings, as you said, there's a lot of parallels here. So, Stephen, did we miss anything in this discussion before I open it up to the audience at large?
Well, one of the things that I look at is the question of trust. Who trusts who? For what? Where? And every year, the Edelman organization does this massive international study of trust. And one of the interesting features of the last 5 years is we don't trust basically anybody anymore. We don't trust the media. We don't trust politicians. Very few people trust the Welsh. But one of the people we trust are business leaders. And they are actually, along with scientists, the most trusted part of our communities. But do we trust them to change? We trust them for knowledge and information and for truth-telling to some degree, but we're not sure as organizational members that we trust them to lead. And I think until you get a level of trust, even in the C-suite, I mean, I've worked in organizations that want to change, but there's only 2 people want to change, and the other 6 C-suite members don't. So I've been in that dynamic. I've been in a dynamic where the bottom of the organization that's closest to customers know they have to change, but the top doesn't listen. So I think trust is the underlying challenge here. And when we did a massive turnaround at Debenhams in the UK, we had frontline staff in the boardroom and boardroom people, the C-suite, on the front line on a regular basis as part of the change. We said, if you want to make this change work, demonstrate it by your behavior. Oh, well, I'm, the chief financial officer. I have all this stuff to do. Well, quit and we'll get somebody else. Get down there and sell shirts. And that's what they did. And they began to realize more about the business than they'd ever known before. And all of them came from the floor, but they'd forgotten it. But that built trust. So as we made some massive changes, getting the place ready for a major sale of the business to another buyer, we grew the business 16% in 18 months, and we reduced staff turnover, which is a huge cost in retail, and we increased profit per square foot in every single store, 185 stores in the UK. And we did that by rebuilding trust and refocusing on the core business. Took a while, but that's what we did.
But you noted that the signals that change was called for were stronger and more readily recognized at the front end, that is at the consumer student level, than they were at the institutional or upper level. So change typically comes from the bottom, not from the top. And leaders are the ones that recognize that. I've often commented of General Eisenhower in World War War II, and Churchill in England during the war, had enormous respect at the soldier level in the trenches and of the public because they were trusted. They were leaders that they believed cared about the individual at the front end. How many institutions today care about waiting lists? How many institutions today care about the welfare of the individual? I personally, as some of you know, have railed about not the quality of care that I've experienced as a caregiver, because it was phenomenal, but they didn't understand me as a caretaker serving the person. They didn't look at me relative to the person I was serving. They looked at me as a source of supply. What they cared about was supply, not consumer. Not service. Service was secondary. Supply was primary. That's a major Canadian problem of every institution. They're protecting supply without regard to what the implications are for the consumer. They'll argue, you take away supply, the consumer will suffer. What you're saying is status quo is not an answer to the future.
No.
Okay, I'm going to open it up to discussion. That was a hell of a lecture that you gave us, Stephen. That was wonderful. Thank you for a good wrap up there. And Dawn, I see you smiling, so we must Jeff Kramer, you're on. Go ahead.
Yeah, so it's interesting. As you know, I listen to Peter Diamandis' Moonshots and Mindsets podcast quite regularly. And one of the things that him and his group talk about quite frequently is whether or not higher education is worth it. So, spending several $100,000 to go to Harvard. And he's seriously considering, recommending that his children not go to higher education and that they get involved in some sort of business that is involved with AI, because you can hire essentially an AI expert in any field for a few $100s a month these days. So the question is, will a degree in the future have value? So as an example, if you have an AI monitoring your health, and you go to your family doctor, it's quite likely that the AI will know more about your health than your family doctor will. Now, the family doctor may still, have a function to perform as being a check on the AI to confirm that what it's suggesting makes sense. But in the end, those kinds of processes can be taken over. And I think that's true of all the professions. So for engineering, it could be the same sort of thing. You need something done. You ask the AI to come up with a plan, and then the engineer goes through and makes sure the calculations were good, and essentially becomes a rubber stamp on the process. So that may be a way that the professions will, the institution will protect itself, in the sense that we can still continue to operate as professionals, but we aren't going to be performing the same function as, being down there in the guts of the beast, I guess you could say. So anyway, that's kind of my take on it. I think it's an interesting transition that we're going through, and it brings up the question of, will any jobs be safe? And we've talked about that before.
Well, you brought up, you made a very important observation. This discussion needs to be brought down to the personal level. That in a world of rapid change, and AI is one of them, and it's the one we focus on most obviously because it seems to be almost existential. What should individuals be doing in terms of their own resilience? I talk to young people that are terrified about going into the cave. And by that, I mean about change, about doing something unique, doing something original, doing something their parents might not have done, other than Facebook, which is secure. It seemed to me resilience is not intelligence. Resilience is courage. Resilience is prepared to open up your eyes and look differently. Resilience may be, in fact, being counterintuitive. There's something at the individual level which is fundamental for survival that institutions don't seem to have. And that's curiosity, that's doubt. Go ahead, Jeff.
No, I was just going to say that given the prior conversation about institutions and their somewhat hard-coded inability to deal with some of this, I think that puts more onus on the individual to be responsible, to be intrapreneurial within an organization and entrepreneurial outside of it, and to take responsibility for their own learning and adoption of technologies and tools. If you sit and wait for something to happen to you, then something will happen to you, and it may not be what you desire. So I think taking more initiative, it's not just resilience, it's what's her name? I can't remember. She wrote a book called Grit. That's what I think is called for. Angela, I can't remember her last name. Duckworth, something like that. Anyway,
when you come up with it, we'll enter it into the article. But okay, Dawn, your turn.
I wanted to say that I think whether it's us personally or whether you're in an organization, you've always got to be scanning internally and externally and keeping an eye on what's going on and where things are going and your own relevance to the marketplace. I think whether you're an organization or you're an individual. And you have to be like Wayne Gretzky. Wayne Gretzky used to skate to where the puck was going to be.
But we talk about trust. Maybe a fundamental feature of resilience is an element of distrust, an element of critical thinking, an element of saying, maybe it's time for me to make a difference, not to go to government and ask government to take care of me, not corporations to find an answer. Maybe it's time for me to step up and find an answer for myself. That's what personal sovereignty is all about. In a time of rapid change, whether it be a tsunami coming at you, whether it's be fundamental change in the educational or corporate system, whether it's being laid off and fired. You can go live on welfare the rest of your life and play a victim, or you can take that as a signal that, wake up call, time for me to rethink my future, as opposed to leaving it with someone else to take responsibility. I mean, that's what personal sovereignty is all about. And it seems corporations are slow to the mark. I've echoed to you numerous times about talking to a president of a university when I said, you're not ready for change, and you're not making change fast enough given the changes confronting you. And he was insulted. I was giving him a signal that he had asked for, and he denied it. Go ahead, Peter McKinnon.
Well, thank you, Perry, and hi all. Thank you very much, Stephen, for your comments. I appreciate and, in fact, relate to a number of the things that you presented. I would argue, though, in the context of trust, which I totally agree, trust is essential in any group, but it's who are you trusting? And so I would argue that integrity is actually even more fundamental than trust, because integrity, either you have it or you don't. And I write about this in regard to the application and development of artificial intelligence tools and the use of those tools in mission critical applications. So I would like to extend that it's more than trust. Integrity is actually core to making these things in a positive way. I mean, if you're a criminal, you can trust your other guys you're going to rob the bank with. But I mean, that's trust.
But are you referring?
Where's the integrity?
Are you referring to integrity at the supply level, or the integrity at an individual level?
At the human level, individual level.
Okay.
I mean, and also you hear a lot now. The word integrity starts to appear frequently now in discussions about corporations. Yeah. The integrity of the corporation.
Well, that's why I asked the question.
I've discovered in the last few years, 2 or 3 years. That was my comment. Thank you, Perry.
Okay, Kevin McNulty. I'm always interested in what Kevin, so I unmuted him intentionally, and I'm going to embarrass the hell out of him. Kevin, what do you want to add here as a good Irishman? What do you think?
A couple of things. First of all, there was a very clever thinker by the name of E.O. Wilson who spoke about the real problem of humanity is that we have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technologies. So, it begs the question, are humans even capable of the evolved requirements for adaptability? Can they really learn to assess risk and even apply critical thinking? And to your earlier point, Perry, I think the answer to those questions are yes, but to your point, how do we feed resilience? How do we feed the kind of intellectual resilience that's required to adapt? And and a risk of AI. I'm a great fan of AI, but is there a risk that AI almost creates an addiction and a dependency so that one does not have to learn to think critically, and so thereby putting one's own personal sovereignty at risk?
Well, you've triggered a thought on which is maybe society and youth in particular have become so hedonistic that they want that quick hit. That the investment in the future is fundamental for resilience. It's not the immediacy of the information, but to think ahead beyond the moment. And I recall some time ago we brought youth to the table. Zorba Emerson and Rachel and a number of 4 people. We were stunned. We thought what we were going to see was dependency and Facebook usage. We saw young people that were very entrepreneurial, high initiative, very positive. And what we got out of that was there's no grounds for hopelessness. We've got leaders emerging, young people in particular. There were among us young people that were taking change, COVID, for example, and they took advantage of it. They saw opportunity. They didn't see the negatives. They saw the positive. They saw the bright lights of change. They saw the opportunities that change brought forward, not the threat. When you look at change as a threat, you hold back, you pull back, You retain the status quo, the things that you have always relied on in the past, your trust in the past. They weren't there. They were excited about putting the headlights on and looking at the future. Now, what does it take to give people sufficient confidence? There's a word used in child psychology, Stephen, about young kids who have sufficient confidence that they can go into the cave as opposed to holding back and being insecure and seeing everything in a negative, depressive manner. These kids had it. If I had control of a better vocabulary, I'd know just what that word is, but it is a form of resilience. Haley, go ahead.
Okay, you know I'm going to bring it back to my song page here.
It's a short symphony, right?
It's very short.
Okay.
Very short and sweet. Three things, though. First thing, critical thinking. Critical thinking. It's the ability to step outside the institution that we are in. If we're still asking, thinking that the institution is the problem, I mean, we've been designed to need them. The dependence isn't incidental. As long as we're still asking, how do we fix the institution? We're still inside the frame the institution built for us. Critical thinking is the capacity to think outside that which was built for us. And correct me if I'm wrong, Steve, because everything useful I've learned is because of Stephen Perry. Truly. Critical thinking number one, who does this serve? What is the existence of this structure for us? And Perry, you said last time you were talking with a politician who wanted to implement something because they knew what was best for everyone else. And that's the ultimate form of control. It's wrapped in ribbons and bows, and I'm doing this for your benefit. Trust me. Trust is, it's conditional. That's transactional. So yes, trust is important. I love the idea of integrity. How do you earn that? But the resilience doesn't necessarily come from trusting other people. Who trusts you is an important question I would ask. And you build, and we talked about this in the last, up to this week. You build your own relational infrastructure. You build the network that knows you, that trusts you, and that will vouch for you without needing that institution to mediate or credentialize. That is your resilience. And that's from personal experience. That's what I have found having Steve and having you, Perry, in my network all of these years. I can absolutely confidently say that I am who I am today because of the network I've had with you all. That's it. And thirdly, I'm going to bring it home to the song page. You have to protect your capacity to imagine, and not as a creative indulgence. It's a survival skill. Everybody has used this exact example when you're talking about these poster child cases that were successful. It's a survival skill. Institutions were designed to produce people who are very good at operating within these systems. AIs made that cheap. What remains scarce, and you can't automate it, and you can't credentialize, and you can't carve it in stone, is the ability to see what doesn't yet exist and move toward it anyway. You call that courage. It could just be a habit that we build in.
Yeah. I think it's brilliant, the people you pointed out who have been part of your network. I'm delighted to hear that. And we'll pause for a moment there and let
I'm not
that
blowing smoke. I'm serious.
But I think that the point you're making, and the point I think that we need to reinforce, is the power and the relevance of networking at a time of uncertainty. I mean, that's what this group really is. We're all curious. We're sharing with one another without political intent, without profit, because we think there may be information that we can share with one another, and we're engaged in critical thinking, that everyone who speaks doesn't necessarily convince me that they've necessarily got something to share, but we're open-minded. And that open-mindedness and being able to be guarded against those who you should not trust is something you almost get in your youth from your parents. is an element of distrust, but at the same time, a confidence to go out into the world and be prepared to accept the fact that when you're hitchhiking, there may be a bad experience and get the hell out of the car. You got to be able to detect it real, but for God's sakes, you got to live. And during this period of transition from the knowledge economy to wherever we're going with all these changes, we have to live. I think, Bogdan, you've made reference to the biological system that says, well, the resilience is systems die and then something else emerges. But that's just at the personal level. We fail from time to time. We make a mistake and we get up again. That takes a certain person, a certain confidence to say failure is not the end. Failure is sometimes just the beginning of a new life. And you know I'm going through that right now with the loss of a spouse. That's a loss. There's no question it's a loss. But it's also a signal of openness, of freedom, of looking at a new life. I could spend a lot of time, they must have some calendar that says what's socially acceptable to grieve and what's socially appropriate to wake up to the fact that there may be a new life ahead of us. Those that grieve the rest of their life are victims, and that's by choice. And those that wish to look forward and put a light on it and not say grieve but celebrate, that's a choice too. And those that are resilient are the ones that make choices about the life they're going to live in an environment of uncertainty. You're smiling, Stephen. Go ahead, unmute. I know you're just dying to add something there. You're muted.
Not really. I mean, I think the capacity for foresight and anticipation is pretty key here. And one of the things I would observe is the structures we've created in institutions or organizations are about retrospective reaction. They're not about anticipation. So you take the University of Toronto, whose board has 52 members, right? Apple has 14 members on its board, and their primary purpose, other than holding the CEO accountable for the money, is to help him think about what's going to happen 5 years from now. Right. Very few organizations have an anticipatory capacity.
Yeah.
And so, we've been spending a lot of time over the last decade teaching foresight skills in K-12 systems and higher education systems, but I'm not impressed with the capacity of systems to use that thinking, partly because, nothing much is happening. In fact, things are going backwards, not forwards in Alberta. So I think this whole anticipation piece, which is Haley's point about imagination and the creative components of our thinking, and the network you participate in that helps you imagine a different future, are pretty key to making change possible. But
foresight isn't knowing the future. Foresight is giving value to thinking about the future and the possibility.
Possibilities, plural.
Yeah.
Plural. Yeah. There isn't one future. There's lots of possible futures. And I think part of the thing is thinking through the direction of travel, but also the scenarios of possibilities. And that's what I get paid a lot to do, is to help organizations say, okay, we're stuck. Imagine a different future for us. And I'm doing that right now for an international organization. And I said to them, there are 11 possible futures, 6 of which you're incapable of even imagining. So let's not go there.
Sure. Well, I mean, that presumably is the value of strategic planning, is to spend some time anticipating the future, not necessarily framing it, but being ready for a variety of scenarios, which is
nobody does strategic planning anymore, Perry. I mean, it died about 5 years ago.
Well, I'm talking about how you build resilience by anticipating a scenario of a variety of options.
Right.
Go ahead, Glenn.
Oh, did you say me, Perry?
Yeah, I see you, Glenn.
How are you
You're
doing?
up in my left-hand corner. I don't know where you are in others frame.
Well, first of all, I want to say, Perry, I read the note you sent out about the passing of your wife, and I think everybody that read it could be able to reflect on in their own personal lives what a lot of what you wrote in there. So I could go on, but I just want to say thank you. That was very well done. And
beautifully written.
Yeah, it touched both my wife and I. So, but my comment here today, this to me sounds like a very much, with no disrespect, a very academic discussion about a lot. You know, we're trying to talk about country sovereignty, then we talk about province sovereignty, then city, and now we're down to personal sovereignty. I see these kids. I mean, now they get medals and participation medals. Drives my son nuts. We always seem to fear change. You talked about that, but when I look at humans, I mean, we've come through. Well, war is just a constant. I thought we were past all that, and nobody's even. You hardly see Ukraine and Russia in the war in the news anymore. I was talking the other day with my father, who grew up, didn't have a flush toilet. Didn't have all this stuff. A lot of the food is very salty. That was the way of preserving it. He went through the dirty 30s. Dad had to leave the farm, sold the cows for less than what he paid for them. So and change, everything, everybody knows this: horses to cars, computers. Computers are going to wipe out so many jobs. Phones to cell phones. If you ask a kid, we're at a museum one day, and the mom says, look, that's a telephone, and the little kid said, what's a telephone? So we all seem to fear this change, but my greatest thing I've always said is we're just in such a hurry to get there. And sometimes I wonder if we know where they is. We got these self-imposed, we got to go faster. And lots of time it's just because, Calgary competes with Edmonton, Canada competes with, the US. We're just in this competition, and maybe it comes back to this personal sovereignty. I like Star Trek, and I always think that, it's because interplanetary travel is now possible. And, we're just one world. We're worried about Klingons. We're not worried about, China. So I wonder where the future is going. But just to finish it, there's always two sides to everything. Every time change comes along, people fear it and people appreciate it. I saw the other day a guy, the robot's going to pick the lettuce, the robot's going to pack the lettuce, the robot's going to drive the trucks, the robot's going to put it on the shelf. What are we going to do? Well, maybe that's the future where, and this guy's article says, I see AI taking us down to a 4-day work week. I can think of no greater social benefit than taking us down to more time off. Like, my son and his wife works, they make a lot of money. They can't live unless they make, a couple $100,000 a year. And I go, really? Like, we had one car. I took the bus to work. We shopped at Food for Less, which I think is gone. I don't know what happened to that company. But, I just see, AI. I mean, the internet's going to destroy our kids. We used to have when I moved, I had to throw out my encyclopedias. I felt so bad because, we used to sit around and do this. So, there's two sides of this. We got to get up in the morning. Albert Einstein says, you got to get up in the morning, decide if this is a wonderful, happy world, or, are you going to focus on Iran, or are you going to focus on doing a good job and come to Perry's chat thing? Because there is so much going on in the world. We never see it. It's not written up in the newspapers. I get, the good news, every morning when I get, Forbes and some of these other things, and, a couple of AI newsletters that I follow. And now we're worried about it going too far, too fast. And I go, what is the time? I think one time you told me your wife had a PhD and she studied time. And I go, wow, I want to have a glass of wine with her and talk about what that really means, because we're 2,000 or 10,000 or 110,000 years old. Who's creating this timeline that we got to get there fast?
Well, I think one of the insights in the course of our series of webinars about personal sovereignty is the importance of taking a time out, spending some time alone, walking in the woods, sitting in a rocking chair, for that matter. I mean, I don't know whether you're aware, but I don't think I've shared it. For every webinar, I'll lie down for about a half hour. I'll reflect. I'll get my mind focused on what we're going to talk about. I'll think about what I'm going to say about Stephen Murgatroyd. I'll think about what I might say differently about Haley Cummins, who's really Haley Simons. I'll reflect on Dawn. I'll spend a moment getting my mind focused on what it is we're going to do for today. And I don't think people today, or maybe they do, maybe young people do, spend a moment thinking about themselves and what they are and what they would like to do instead of being reflective and reactive to the world around them. And all they see is speed, change, as if they are somehow victims to it all. They have choice. They have choice to step back for a moment and think, who am I and what do I wish to do in this environment? Go ahead, Dawn. You may get the last word. I'm going to give I'm going to give Michelle the last word. So Michelle, you give some thought to what it is you'd like to share about what we've been doing today. Go ahead, Dawn.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a quick point about all of these foundational things we do to get ourselves off to a good start and be able to be successful in this world. But I reflect back on the youth that attended a number of sessions and how they were embracing change and very adaptable. I think this is a characteristic that's so very important, and it's part of our will to adapt to situations and have that growth mindset. And that serves us well in this world too.
I'm excited right now, Michelle. So give me a moment here. When I listen to young people, in spite of all of the resistance to change at the institutional, at the government, at the corporate level, youth offer promise. They had courage to do things differently. They had courage to think about things in a different way. I came away from that as I come away from our sessions as well. I know there's resistance to change, but that doesn't mean that human beings necessarily have to comply. We don't have to be public and civil citizens. We can be a little bit rebels in order to advance revolution. Evolution.
Can I just make a comment about that, Perry? I agree with all of the comments about that, the youth panel that you hosted.
Yeah.
And I think I said it at the time. That was a demonstration of survivor's bias.
Okay.
Because that was an exceptional group that you brought to that.
I know.
And I'm not worried about anybody that you brought in to discuss. Vivek, Bobby, Rachel, Emerson, unbelievable, bright, smart people, right?
Yeah.
I'm worried about the other much larger group that is, as we've been discussing, on their phone constantly, working at McDonald's or living in their parents' basement, playing video games and not engaged, not feeling empowered, not having a sense of agency. Those are the ones I'm worried about.
This may be, Jeff, the bifurcation or the division of a society into those that are dependent and those that are initiating. I don't think that government gives you permission to take initiative. You find that from within. I don't think but I think government does, in fact, reinforce in the welfare state that sense of victimhood. If you have had something in your life that hasn't quite fit, government can help you. That can create a dependency. But the people that we saw are above that. Yes. They didn't want to be dependent. They wanted to take the gifts that they had been given at birth or through their parenting or through their schooling or through their courage or through their experience and say, I want to embrace life. I want to take change as an opportunity, not as a threat. That single little thing is the basis of resilience.
Yeah, that's the K-shaped economy that we keep reading about and brought to life.
Yeah.
Right? We're on the upper swing of that K. Yeah. And those other individuals that we've been talking about are on the downswing. And that's a very dangerous thing to continue for our society.
Well, but that bifurcation may just be a reality. It may take a while. Society may bifurcate before it ends up coming back together again. It may be that those and I don't want to even use those that have those creative instincts in the environment of change may be the very ones that ultimately bring the rest of us back together so we have a, quote, a civilization. Michelle, I don't want to embarrass you, and I did sort of pick you out of my screen, but I know from the environments that we have on Fridays that you've always got something intelligent to share. There, boy, if that doesn't position you, is there something you'd like to share with us in the wrap-up?
Well, thank you very much, Perry. It's I haven't been part of this for a while, but what I am very I guess interested in the thoughts that have been shared here about institution, the history of how institutional thinking got in, and who trusts who, and the resiliency, the mind, people, children, today even children, to the level of children and young adults not wanting or taking the time to think through things. Sovereignty, how do you stand up for yourself? How do you do what's right, even though you might get fired because you're stepping out, you're doing something that you know is right, because this is what needs to happen if you're going to get your organization to the front. It's about critical thinking. How do you get the mind, the thinking, so you are actually leveraging what data you have that you're dealing with? And I've talked about it before in the seance, which is the Kepner-Trago problem solving and decision making workshop. That to me is the epitome of critical thinking. This is where you can make thinking visible, where language doesn't matter and it just goes from one process to the next. There's 5. You can actually just seamlessly navigate the thinking process. So institutionalized or not, you can make your own decision. Now, there's an important point that which I guess with all the thoughts tonight, it's about trust and integrity. For me, integrity comes first.
Mhm.
And one thing nobody mentioned is the engagement of hearts, not just minds, but hearts. Because you see, if you get into a situation where you have a board and you can uh, convey the integrity that you have for whatever it is you're trying to accomplish, where you want a vision, take the organization, and you can have them understand that you're coming from integrity. There's no other place you're coming from. And then you build that trust because you get to know people, and then you engage their hearts with your heart. And then I think, you can conquer the world, because once you engage hearts, then the mind comes with it. And when the heart is engaged, that energy and creativity of your creativity, when you are relaxing, right? So you take the time out to think, you are connecting with your heart. And when you do that, it's amazing what innovative thoughts you can have and who you can reach out to, because you see, once you do that, your whole energy changes. And before you even speak or walk into the room, people feel you.
This is a superb ending,
So,
Michelle.
so I don't know if
I-
I'm making sense, but resiliency is
yeah.
all about, can you have sovereignty in yourself because you trust yourself, you know yourself, you stand in your own truth, you know that you're like this. The reason I love the seance that you created 20 years ago, that I've just started to come to, is because, it's about making the world a better place by putting thought and thoughtfulness together, trying to understand how things relate and interact. Because I know Dawn Ringrose. I don't know if she remembers me from many years
Yes, I
ago.
do. Certainly.
Because she and I come from a quality background. I love process.
Yeah.
I do process mapping, mind mapping, and everything about me is all about lines and how things connect, and then how do you simplify and make the complex simple. And for me, even when you're trying to improve quality in an organization, if you can get to the hearts, forget inspecting quality into stuff. You can't do it. Quality is assured by engaging people's hearts, so they want to do such a good job that they will not let anything pass that's not above grade.
Well,
And so,
thank you, Michelle.
anyway, that's just
No,
I just want to add, it's for Michelle's benefit and my benefit, because we've got these quality backgrounds. It's where Deming meets Joe Dispenza.
right. That's what I'm about. I'm into Joe
Yeah.
Dispenza and the
no, look,
energy.
I know we're in wrap up. I want to thank all of you. I want to thank in particular Stephen, who joined us today, Dawn, Haley, Jeff, of course, and all of you. And Michelle, you brought to the surface something that I feel passionate about, and that is the bringing of the emotions and the intellect together. We have so valued the intellect, the knowledge, the to know, that we've ignored the relevance of that thing that seems intangible, that accountants don't understand. And we built a society based on what accountants seem to understand, that institutional structure, where we value things that we can count. It's very hard to count that piano, what that piano does in the corner. It's very hard to count what Haley got with her PhD. It's very hard to count what Tommy does with his work on consciousness, what Bogdan experienced when he jumped off that ship to try and save. It's that passion that Tom has when Tom looks at a production and doesn't think about the film, but thinks about the people that will ultimately benefit. It's what we do, what Stephen does when he works with an individual or a corporation and thinks beyond the structure and thinks about the meaning that brings emotion and intellect together. That's the future. The revolution that I think we are confronted by AI is the revolution is not about the intellect, is not about the knowledge, but the breaking away from that and realize that there's so much more yet to be discovered by this bringing together of what I have been through and they call channeling, where you have the capacity to bring your emotions and your intellect together and discover something you've never seen before. That you might have been afraid, in reality you're braver, not afraid of the future. That change is a signal for opportunity, not for threat and victimhood. So I thank you, Stephen. I thank all of you. I just enjoy our session so much. So thank you for sharing all this with me personally. Take care.